Speaking of working, if you work, you probably have a boss. I, of course, have lots of bosses, including my boss, Alex, who sits in the control room. Now, every workplace situation is not perfect. We all know that. But it's made much worse if the company has hired bad bosses. These bosses lack leadership skills. We spoke to Robert Sutton. He's a management science professor at Stanford University and author of Good Boss, Bad Boss. We asked him what the real costs and consequences are of having that bad boss.
When you have somebody who is constantly taking away your energy, making you feel bad about yourself, we have all sorts of research that shows that people are less productive, they're less creative, they tend to leave.
And all these things ultimately have a cost in society and in the workforce. Why do companies continue to promote bosses who ultimately are bad? Because a lot of times they know that the boss isn't that well liked by their employees.
Well, I think that there's a problem with culture, especially in the United States, but in other countries too, that we believe that when somebody is a little nastier, it makes them a little more competent. It's the brilliant but cruel sort of effect. And there is evidence that at first blush, when somebody's sort of nasty, we think they're smarter.
One of the things that you wrote about was the fact that these bad bosses, and arguably bad employees as well, cost companies money. By not dealing with the problem, they ultimately deal with it longer term in many, many other ways. Walk us through that problem.
Okay, so there's a number of ways in which bad bosses cost, especially ones who are nasty. Because when people are incompetent, I mean, they don't know how to do the work. We know that's causing all sorts of problems. But when somebody's at least moderately competent and they leave others feeling demeaned and de-energized, people are afraid to criticize them. There's actually some good research that nurses who are afraid to bring up and criticize their boss, they're more likely to make mistakes and not report them, to learn from them. There's also evidence that employees get physically and mentally sick. And this is the most important thing for employers. There's evidence that when somebody is a nasty boss, what ends up happening is they end up with increasingly worse and worse employees because the good ones can get jobs and the bad ones stay on. So if you're really grumpy because everybody always works for you is just an idiot and you treat them like an idiot, it might be because those who aren't idiots go and work for somebody else.
That is an excellent point, but okay, what recourse do I really have? I mean, as an employee of an organization, the boss obviously has the power, an employee is just an employee. Right. What power, what can you really do?
So we've got, from my research, we have a whole, essentially, hierarchy of things you can do. The first thing you can do, and I always advise this, if you're in a bad situation, get out if you possibly can. Many of us cannot do that because of the employment situation we're in. We need the money. Maybe it's near retirement. There's lots of reasons. The job market's tough. My perspective on that is figure out if it's somebody you can have a polite backstage conversation with. If you can, that's a good way to do it. If that doesn't work, if you can't do that, look around your workplace and look who the boss will listen to or has power over the boss. Go talk to them. It's especially important when you have that conversation to carefully document it and to also have people who will back up your story.
Does that help or hurt the case when it comes to dealing with difficult bosses? Is the tough economy making it more acceptable to be a bad boss because you feel like, well, these employees are more replaceable. If you don't want to do the job, we'll find somebody else that can.
In the U.S., we have a famous basketball coach named Bob Knight, the winningest basketball coach in history, managed to get fired for treating people like dirt, and even though he was like the man on campus. And that's something to keep in mind, that when you're a bad boss, even if you're CEO of a large corporation, unless you own the whole thing, there's almost always somebody who can fire you. So you are putting yourself at risk. But yes, to answer your question, some of us in the bad economy do have to shut our mouths and put up with it. But what happens is, and you go back to the Larry Summers situation, the Bob Knight situation, those people you're treating like dirt now, they're lying in wait to get you, and very often they do get you later on.
All right, that was fun stuff. Stanford University professor Robert Sutton, author of Good Boss, Bad Boss.